maybe part of you doesn't want to know.
You offer them a truth and a freedom that they don't want.
Maybe part of you prefers the lie.
You told me you wouldn't listen.
Because sometimes the truth can be so ugly.
I ain't no slave.
And the lie can be so comforting.
You are now all free.
And the last thing you'd ever want to admit is that we all still live on Jones Plantation.
Okay, so as you can see, I'm back in Canada, back to the Jones Plantation, back to the place where I'm owned. Because the government of Canada owns you if you're a Canadian. No matter where you live, your government pretty much owns you like property. And this film, The Jones Plantation, is a great film, I think, because it really underscores that that's our circumstance, that
you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage. Born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind.
I mean, I worked in the film industry for 7 years. I was a set paramedic, so I worked covering film sets, giving medical coverage to the production, covering stunts, that kind of thing. And occasionally I play a paramedic in TV shows or movies. I don't watch any of the TV shows or movies that I'm in. Really, I only watch TV shows or movies that I find have something unique to offer. I don't really watch TV shows or movies unless they're conveying something deep and meaningful, and something that's usually hard to convey through words.
Message!
It's depicting something through story that you can't really just explain to people easily anyway. And this is definitely a film like that. That's why I wanted to review it. It's also something that I find resonate with people who are into crypto. Especially if you're into the monetary reform, libertarian kind of side of crypto, using crypto to empower ourselves, take power away from the government instead of taking it away from us and giving it back to ourselves. You'd be interested in this film for sure. It's a great film. I mean, it's made by Larkin Rose. He's a well-known kind of anarchist, libertarian guy. Definitely more anarchist than libertarian. But I mean, he talked about this movie, making this movie for I think 12 to 13 years. I've been anticipating it for that long, and I was quite happy to see the job that they did with it. And it's like I said, it's a film that conveys things that are hard to explain to people. I mean, I've spent a long time trying to explain how our banking system works to enslave us, and you can explain it to people and they just roll their eyes. They don't really want to hear. But you can get this story that kind of engages them a little more than a dry explanation of the conspiratorial view of how our banking system works. And just kind of convey that our governments really all use this illusion that we're free, that we have some say in the process of how we're governed, so that they can just do whatever they want to us. And it conveys that really well in the film. I mean, one of my favorite movies of all time, it kind of reminds me of that, just They Live, that fight scene in They Live, where he's trying to convince the other guy to put on the glasses that allows him to see things for the way they are.
Look! Look at them! They're everywhere!
I don't know. Maybe they can see Valley 5th and Spring.
Now hold on.
With certain people, you can't explain what this movie is telling them, but they can sit and get that message from the movie. Like, it doesn't matter how hard you try to explain this kind of thing to certain people, they won't get it. But you can watch this, you can get them to watch this movie and they'll get it. Which, I think it's a great movie just for that. And really what it's emphasizing is something that I've struggled with for probably the last 15 years quite a bit. It's that modern people have been enslaved in a way that they don't really recognize. And how do how do you remedy that? How do you fix that how do you fix those circumstances when most people don't even know that it's happening to them? And really, I really liked this movie, The Jones Plantation, because it is explaining the problem that we all face that we're all ignoring. It's the big elephant in the room. We're not really free people. We gave away our freedom a long time ago. And we're living under this illusion that our governments care about us. They're all enslaving us. They're all using imaginary debt to force us to work for bankers who haven't done anything for our labor.
Gotcha, bitch!
We're all being forced by banks to work for people who have done nothing in exchange for our labor. It doesn't matter if you don't have any personal debt. The government, like a third of the government's expenses, where I live anyway, in Canada, in Ontario, a third of the provincial budget, a third of the federal budget is interest on money that was created from nothing by bankers that they loaned to the government.
What is this? Where's all the money?
That's as good as money, sir. Those are IOUs.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth your time. Invest the hour and a half. It's a good film. Send it to other people who you can't explain things to. I mean, I can't explain the way the world works to people in my family. They just don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear a simple explanation. But I wish more people would watch this movie and then realize that we're all in the same boat. A lot of the things that people are made to argue about today, it's just divide and conquer bullshit. If we all kind of realize that we're all being enslaved by the people on top, making money from nothing, loaning it to our government, and our government forcing us to work it all off for them. I mean, we'd be a lot better off if everybody realized the circumstances that we're in, but I mean, we're in these circumstances because everyone believes the illusion. Everyone believes that one side of the government cares about them and it's going to take care of them. And this is a real problem, particularly in Canada. I mean, I was hesitant to make this video because I didn't want to I don't want to shit on Canada too hard. I don't want to criticize Canadians universally when it's only some of them who are the way described, but I mean, Canadians in particular should watch this movie because Canadians have this horrible misunderstanding that the government cares about them.
You are an old man who thinks in terms of nations and peoples. There are no nations. There are no peoples. There are no Russians. There are no Arabs. There are no third worlds. There is no West. There is only one holistic system of systems. One vast and immane, interwoven, interacting, multivariate, multinational dominion of dollars. Petrodollars, electrodollars, multi-dollars, Reichmarks, Rins, rubles, pounds, and shekels. It is the international system of currency which determines the totality of life on this planet. That is the natural order of things today. That is the atomic and subatomic and galactic structure of things today. And you have meddled with the primal forces of nature. And you will atone. Am I getting through to you, Mr. Beale? You get up on your little 21-inch screen and howl about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. There is only IBM and ITT and AT&T and DuPont, Dow, Union Carbide, and Exxon. Those are the nations of the world today. What do you think the Russians talk about in their councils of state? Karl Marx? They get out their linear programming charts, statistical decision theories, Minimax solutions, and compute the price-cost probabilities of their transactions and investments, just like we do. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies, Mr. Beale. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business, Mr. Beale. It has been since man crawled out of the slime.
I mean, I've confronted members of each of our political parties, the leaders of each of our political parties, about specifically them enslaving us to imaginary debt. And I got the chance to confront, or rather ask Paul Hellyer about it, who is the former defense minister, exposing our banking system as a way in which they enslave us. And all of our politicians, they kind of just ran and hid and acted guilty when I asked them about it. It was Paul Hellyer. He was very honest with me. I mean, he stuck around after his speech. He shook my hand. He was willing to answer any question. He didn't dodge questions if I asked them to him directly. He would just give me a very honest answer. So, I mean, Canada in particular, there's a lot of weird, horrible things that have happened in the time that I left. I mean, I left here because I couldn't tolerate everything that was going on during COVID. And I mean, if you recognize the things that are being shown in this film, it's always better not to live in the country that thinks that they own you. I personally highly recommend expatriating from wherever you were born to another country, because essentially that country isn't going to look at you like one of their slaves. They're going to look at you like some other plantation slave. And there's certain advantages to just not living in the country that you were born in. Now, the Jones Plantation, it actually reminded me quite a bit of a documentary that I watched. If you wanted to watch a documentary that explains in detail kind of how this works, how we went from the old-style plantation to the new Jones-style plantation, there's a documentary called Slavery by Consent. And really, it's a great film because it's the film that describes in detail and with specifics and with names and dates, it describes what the Jones Plantation is describing artistically. So it's like the literal version of the Jones Plantation. If you wanted to watch a good documentary along with the Jones Plantation, watch Slavery by Consent by Bushwhacked. I'll pin it in my video here. But in Slavery by Consent, it's kind of explaining how the history of all this was done to us, how they would give us this illusion of freedom and then issue us a social insurance number or social security number, and that these numbers would pretty much be like the mark of the beast. A lot of people like to say that CBDCs and crypto and digital ID will be the mark of the beast. Like we already have it. It's a social insurance number. Try to get a job or try to do anything, try to engage in any sort of commerce without a social insurance number or a social security number. You won't be able to. You already have it. The people talking about CBDCs and digital ID, that's just digitizing it. That's just taking it to the next level. But we already have that. So people saying, oh, I'm not going to accept the mark of the beast. Do you have a social insurance number? Do you have a social security number? Then you've accepted it. You've accepted that you need a government ID number in order to trade or engage in commerce. So you've accepted that. But really, I think the message in the Jones Plantation, the message in Slavery by Consent, is that politics is the art of enslaving people by consent. It's the art of tricking you into thinking that you're free and that you're making your own decisions while someone else is getting you to work for them and making the shots, calling the shots the way that they want to call them. So you aren't actually making decisions, you're being forced to work for someone else, but you have this illusion that you're free and that you're making your own decisions. It's brilliant, but it's terrible at the same time, because most people don't recognize the circumstances that they're in. If you don't recognize the circumstances that you're in, how do you escape those circumstances? It's something that I've devoted an enormous amount of time thinking about over the last 15 years. As soon as I pretty much recognized that these were our circumstances, I've endlessly thought about how we could escape these circumstances. And for me, it was after the 2008 circumstance with the banking crisis. I helped COMER, the Committee on Monetary and Economic Reform, to sue the Government of Canada to restore the Bank of Canada to its original mandate, which to me was pursuing a change along official avenues. Like, we were trying to use the courts to bring about change within the government, and doing that all along official channels. And then I see the opposite approach, the one that was taken by Satoshi Nakamoto, which was just, let's just take away their power, the agorist solution, instead of trying to fight the system, break the system, instead of trying to reform the system from within. Let's create a new system that isn't corrupt and then abandon the corrupt one. I mean, that's kind of the idea with Bitcoin and crypto, is that we were going to create this alternative financial system that wouldn't have been corrupted, so that we wouldn't have to deal with the problems of the traditional financial system. We could use this alternative one. And I just take a look at both of these two options, the choosing the official path of change and then choosing the agorist solution. One of these was a total failure, and one of these has a couple $1 trillion invested in it now in the market cap, and at least the total crypto market is a couple $1 trillion now. Nobody even knows, even almost 10 years after it's happened, over 10 years after it's happened, that the Cummer lawsuit even happened. We failed tremendously trying to pursue change along official avenues. Agorism is a much better solution for creating change. Don't try to fix a broken system, a corrupted system. Create an alternative. That's a much better solution. I think that's what we're going to have to do here. And I think the people that are worried about CBDCs, digital ID, that's a major problem, because governments really do want to use blockchain to control us, and we have to flip the script on that. I think something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, in particular, is the idea of a crypto Magna Carta, where if we're going to have digital ID, central bank digital currencies, if we're going to allow the government to use blockchain in any capacity to govern or regulate our lives, that we have to have strict rules in place that are immutable, built into the blockchain. And immutable, when I say immutable, I mean we have to have rules built in where they can't be broken, where the government can't take your money from your CBDC wallet for any bullshit that they think up. There have to be severe and strict limitations on that. And I think much like the way that citizens had to force the monarchs back in the day to give them their rights through signing the Magna Carta, I think we're going to have to force governments to establish limitations on what they can do with blockchain, with what they can do with digital ID. And if we don't have like a digital Magna Carta, a crypto Magna Carta, a blockchain Magna Carta, something like this that lays out what our rights will be going forward in this kind of brave new world we're building, where everything will be digitized and on-chain, then it's going to be a nightmare for us. I think we really need to champion this idea of a crypto Magna Carta, this idea that we, instead of being shackled by government, them giving us a digital ID and controlling what we're allowed to buy, what we're allowed to do, we have to do the exact opposite of this. We have to shackle the government with blockchain. We have to use a blockchain. We have to use all kinds of blockchain technology. We have to have a lot of people thinking about this and talking about this too, because I just think about people like Aldous Huxley back in the day who talked about this in like the 1920s, the 1930s, just predicting the kind of Taylorist society we would have now, the scientific management, top-down scientific management of all different facets of society, and something that we used to have widespread social discussion about like 80 years ago, that's just, now that it's actually happening, we don't have any social discourse about it. We're all just kind of acting like we have to be dragged in whatever direction society is dragging us down. We're not going to have a discussion about whether this is the direction we should go down or not. It's really weird.
I think when the technological and applied scientific means are developed, they just tend to be used. I mean, I think one can say that the whole history of recent times in relation to science and technology shows that if you plant the seed of applied science or technology, it proceeds to grow, and it grows according to the laws of its own being. And the laws of its being are not necessarily the same as the laws of our being. I mean, hence this sense which so many people have, and which I think one sees in so many societies, this sense that man is being subjected to his own inventions, that he is now the victim of his own technology and the victim of his own applied science, instead of being in control of it.
How could he be in control of it?
Well, this is the problem. I mean, I think this is perhaps one of the major problems of our time. How do we make use of this thing? I mean, after all, this was stated in the Gospel. Man, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. And in the same way, technology was made for man, and not man for technology. But unfortunately, the development of of recent social and scientific history has created a world in which man seems to be made for technology rather than the other way round. And we have to start thinking about this problem very seriously and seeing how we can re-establish control over our own inventions.
Suppose that this rather frightful prospect comes about. I mean, are people going to be happy under this kind of regime?
Well, I think you could. I mean, this was one of the sort of what I may call the messages of Brave New World, that it is possible to make people contented with their servitude. I think this can be done. I think it has been done in the past, but I think it could be done even more effectively now, because you can provide them with bread and circuses, and you can provide them with endless amounts of distractions and propaganda.
This all raises, I think, so it does to me anyway, this question of how much one really does value freedom, or really how free one feels oneself to be. I mean, someone like myself, say, was grown up since the war. I mean, do you believe that I am less free than someone who was brought up in the 20s or in the 80s of the last century or in the 18th century?
Well, it depends entirely who you were in the 80s of the last century or the 18th century. I mean, if you were a country gentleman with an income, you were remarkably free, but if you were a peasant on his estate, you were remarkably unfree.
And there's this weird vibe wherever you go. I think any country in the world where people are discussing CBDCs and digital ID and stuff like that, people are just waiting for the government to just pull this trap on them. They're expecting that, like, oh, we're going to have to go in the streets when they declare this and fight this off. And, like, nobody wants this. Absolutely nobody wants the government to be able to control everything that you buy and to just take money from you instantly on a whim for whatever they want. Nobody wants that. Everyone sees that as a nightmare scenario. I think we have to use the commonality we have here, that everyone doesn't want this, and push for something from our end before it's pushed on us. We have to have at least a defensive stance ready before they attack us with this, because governments, they're going to try to attack us with this. Like, really, nobody in the world, I think, wants their government to control them with the CBDC. Nobody wants their government seeing every purchase that they make and being able to take money out of their account at any time for any reason. And really, I think that blockchain is the solution to that. If we could create a system where the government cannot, like physically cannot, and I don't mean like on paper, hypothetically, but I mean in the real world, in practice, will not be able to rob you for something outside of the essential functions of government. Now, I'm sort of a libertarian, anarchist kind of person, but I'm really more of a classical liberal in the sense of politics. I feel like there's definitely certain things that should be managed by the government, because in private hands it's kind of a really bad idea. Like, generally, national defense probably be managed by someone who's not a military contractor, because then they're going to want war for profit. But I mean, this is something that, like, we're either going to get railroaded and allow governments to just totally enslave us with blockchain, or we're going to do the opposite. We have to shackle the government with blockchain before they do it to us first. And there's not enough discussion about this. I think people need to watch the Jones Plantation and realize that they're living on the Jones Plantation, and they have to realize that the solution to escaping the Jones Plantation isn't just to do what I've done, to just escape the Jones Plantation you were born on and go to another plantation where you're at least treated better. I mean, it doesn't matter really where you go. The government is going to claim that they own the people who were born there, but if you are a visitor in that country, you're at least living somewhere where the people who are in charge don't think that they own you. That's a short-term solution. To just leave the country that you were born in to go somewhere where they don't think that they own you is one thing. But I mean, the long-term solution is that everyone needs to realize we live on the Jones Plantation, or some, doesn't matter what country you're in, it's just a different version of the Jones Plantation. And once we have enough people realizing that, it doesn't need to be everybody. It just needs to be a large enough group of people that will say, we're not going to take this anymore. And really, I want to help people in Canada to realize that they live on the Jones Plantation, even though they treated me like shit for a couple of years. I mean, it's terrible. I see them as victims still, even though they treated me like shit. I mean, everyone's just really living under the heel of government here and acting like the government's their friend, and it's really sad that everyone here kind of embraces government social programs as if the government really wants to help us. It's really sad. It's not the case. But, I mean, I would say get anyone you can to watch the Jones Plantation. They'll realize they're living on the Jones Plantation when they watch a movie like this. It's kind of hard to watch the full movie and lie to yourself afterwards and pretend you're not living in the Jones Plantation, although I'm sure there are people who will. It's a great film. Just get someone to watch it, and it'll open their eyes to the world that they're living in. And once we've got enough people realizing that they're living in the Jones Plantation, we have to act. Like, it's not just enough to watch a film like this and realize that these are our circumstances. We have to put a lot of thought and attention and discussion into how do we escape these circumstances. That's really what I wanted to focus on this channel. I was going to focus on a lot of blockchain stuff that's empowering to people. I'm still going to, but this particular idea of a crypto Magna Carta is something that I want to popularize. I've got a website that I'm going to start. It's a TLD that I acquired called the Crypto Magna Carta. So it'll be .the Crypto Magna Carta in the URL. But I'd like to have some collaboration from people, mostly blockchain developers, but I want to get a group of blockchain developers together who are going to have this idea of how we could implement digital payments just in general for government services. Essentially, my idea for what crypto should be used for at this point. I mean, if I were to design the crypto market according to my own wishes, it would be that we would have a market that replaces government. That the goal of people building in crypto should be to replace government with blockchain as much as possible. And really to free ourselves from the corruption of governments with blockchain in that way, by honestly replacing everything that the government does with a GoFundMe account or a blockchain. And when people ask, I'm going to make an hour-long video about just describing that in general. I probably will later. I think I'll actually make the next video about this topic in general, the Crypto Magna Carta. But I think people in the blockchain space need to think about this, that governments are either going to enslave us with blockchain and central bank digital currencies and digital ID, or we can do it the other way. We can make it so that the government actually works the way we want it to and can't rob us to steal, can't rob our money to spend on just ridiculous things, to spend on researching the mating habits of Japanese quail while they're on cocaine. That was a real thing that the US government spent money on. I'll probably find a clip here and put it in there. But really, these people just take our money and they spend it on nonsense, and it's really just forcing us to pay for things that we wouldn't want to pay for if we were in charge of that money ourselves. And if someone else took your credit card and forced you to pay for a bunch of shit that you wouldn't want to pay for, you would never accept that. But when it's your government, you just bend over and take it every single time, and it doesn't make sense. People need to develop this sense of self-respect again that they seem to have lost, especially in Canada. Canadians don't have self-respect. All of these Canadians that were in the Freedom Convoy and were treated like shit for 2 years. I'm sorry, I left pretty much right after it happened. And I came back and it's like everyone's just given up and you can't get an organ transplant. And you're paying the same taxes as someone who can. This is insane. Even the people who were fighting the government during COVID, they've given up now. It's just like, oh, I can make money again? Like, I can travel between provinces and get on a plane again? It doesn't matter that I will be left to die if one of my organs fails, but at least I can go and, earn my paycheck now. That's such a pathetic standard for where people will draw the line and be like, okay, we're done fighting now. We can go back to work and we can travel again, even though we'll be left to die if we need life-saving medical care. It's insane. It's insane. There's really something wrong with Canadian men. I've talked about this a lot. It's an attack. I try not to be critical. I could sit here and shit on how Canadian men are spineless, ballless cowards for an hour, but it's a chemical attack where most of these guys have like really low testosterone. It's like a chronic problem in North America, and like it's something that I kind of noticed as soon as I landed here, because I started focusing on it a few years ago. You notice the men here are like very much feminine, and I don't understand how, like, for me it just infuriates me to think the idea that my wife and kids would be left to die by our healthcare system. It makes me so angry that I want to fight someone. Like, really badly makes me want to fight someone. And like I'm laughing, but I'm just covering up a blood rage that I have inside when I think about these things. And I don't know how I could, if I was living here for the last 2 years as someone in these circumstances, like, I wouldn't have been able to just sit here and sit around on my ass and do nothing for 2 years while those were the circumstances. Like, I'd be raising hell, and nobody's doing that here. Everyone's just accepted that, like, they're second-class citizens now, and they won't be allowed a life-saving organ transplant. But they're not complaining about paying the same amount in taxes. There's something where the Canadians need to snap out of this, especially where, like, this complacency and this obedience is just pathetic. Where, like, you're getting just railroaded and you don't care and you're not willing to stand up or fight for anything. It's just really pathetic. I don't understand it. I think it's just the complacency. Like, if you're comfortable, you have a nice house, you have a nice bed, you have a nice roof over your head, you just don't care. And it's, no amount of material comfort can make me okay with that. I don't know. I don't want to shit on Canadians too hard. Like I said, it's, I see them as the victims in this, but something's got to change. So eventually they've got to grab their balls and do something about it. And if they're not going to do that, then we've at least got to push for something like a crypto Magna Carta. Eventually we're going to be backed into a corner, and if we don't have something like that, that we can at least know, have a lot of, we need to put a lot of thought into what the world will look like when governments are using digital ID and CBDCs, and how we could arrange that so that we're not living on the Jones Plantation with digital ID and CBDCs.